In this video, we're going to talk about 6 heroes to climb you to diamond as quickly as possible. I'm going to be talking about incredibly strong heroes to main that will slingshot you to the diamond rank and beyond. But for those of you who want some extra help, definitely check out my private coaching. Links will be in the description down below. But without further ado, let's jump right into the video. Now, the first character I highly suggest you start grinding is Ashe, and I think that Ashe is not only just a very strong character in the meta, but just a very strong character to grind with and learn a lot about the game. There's a lot that Ashe has going for her. Very high damage, especially burst damage, which means that your damage is going to feel very impactful, especially criticals. And not only in your primary fire, but with your dynamite, you can not only do tons of damage to anything that you can see because you're a hit scan, but you can also damage people that are around corners or trying to LOS you in some way. Ashe also has really good mobility, being able to not only run away from things, but take the high ground on a whim, and this type of flexibility is really hard to come by across the DPS role. And of course, her ultimate is one of the strongest ultimates in the DPS role as a whole, capable of carrying fights. Now, the first thing that I would really suggest you make sure you're doing on Ashe is you take your time. I see way too many Ashe players just in a rush to deal damage, and you really need to find a groove with Ashe where you're not just shooting non-stop to the point where you're rushing your abilities, you're hitting none of your dynamites, and you're running out of ammo. I always say slow things down to the point where you're doing them consistently and then speed things up. And it's the same way with aiming, and it's the same way with being consistent with your ability use and ability combos. If you're throwing your dynamite and you're missing them, you're probably trying to do too many things all at once, and you just need to slow down. And it's okay if you're not doing something every single possible millisecond in a game. You need to nail down the execution of things, nail down the flow of the character, and then you can start to speed up and get better at trying to maximize every single second. And this is true across the board for characters. It's not just true for Ashe. Another tip I'll give you on the character is make sure that if you're in a good position, try to isolate your movement. I see way too many Ashe players try to dodge, bob and weave, crouch spam when no one's shooting at them, and they're just making their aim far worse instead of long strafes, or in some cases, even standing still. You're going to be more consistent with your aim, and then you can move after the fact or if anyone's targeting you or you're under threat. And last up, a tip I'll give you about your dynamite use. Make sure that you're trying to avoid tanks in particular, because most tanks are just going to completely ignore your dynamite. You're really going to want to either 1, use it to pressure out DPS from off angles, or 2, use it to pressure out squishies, supports in the enemy backline. And the reason it's so great on supports is any sort of passive damage is going to prevent them from getting automatic heal. So especially if you did a giant chunk of damage to somebody and they're trying to run away, you can throw it so that it explodes around the corner, lights them on fire, prevents them from healing, gives your divers or any other people chances to kind of push that person, or that person's just going to die outright. So it's really important to keep that pressure on, and it's a very powerful ability at dealing with all squishies, but it's way too easy to just throw it in the front line and keep hitting tanks with it over and over again, but it's not getting that much value at all. So keep that in mind. Next up, we do got to talk about Baptiste. And Baptiste is a phenomenal character, and there's a lot of reasons why this character is so damn strong, and I highly suggest him, especially to climb to diamond. Number 1 is definitely his mobility, and it's kind of the same reason that Ashe is super strong. You have that high ground alteration, right? Take the low ground, go back to the high ground. You can't really do horizontal movement, but that vertical movement is super overpowered on most maps because there's always a high ground place that you could play around. And keep in mind, positionally, you're going to be stronger when you're near these high ground centric areas. Now, in addition to that, Baptiste's immortality field is just an extra layer of things that people have to play through and play around. And it's going to get more value when players are not as disciplined, they're not as focused on what they should do. While maybe in the higher ranks, people are definitely going to target it more and deal with it better. In the lower ranks, you'll have a lot of people wasting damage, wasting value, shooting at people instead of shooting at an immortality field. And there's not a lot of people that realize it's their job to deal with it. So you're going to get some extra value there. In addition to that, Baptiste just does a ton of healing. And while it's not a support's job to just perma pump people with heals, you're supposed to be doing damage and other things as well. But when you have an inting Reinhardt that is going to just feed and die, and you're going to lose if they die, being able to pump them with a lot of heals when you need to is actually good. And oftentimes when they get those resources, they make some magic happen. But if they don't get those resources, they just feed. Now, I do want to make it clear, though, you don't want to just always enable these type of people. You don't want to always enable tanks either. This can often become this, like, self-fulfilling loop where you give someone too much resources so they think they can go above and beyond their limits, and then they still go way more aggressive than they should, and they're only doing that because they think that they're going to get that level of resources when they should never be playing that way in the first place. And it's important for you to understand that you should be finding value in other ways and not setting the precedent for you being a heal bot in any character, period. It's super important to not set a precedent of being a heal bot to your tank, or else they're going to treat you like one, and everyone's just going to lose, right? Another thing about Baptiste that's amazing is just the fact that you can do a ton of damage. Like, Baptiste has crazy high damage output, and you can do this a lot, and you should be doing damage a ton. And I love the fact that because Baptiste burst heals so fast, you can spend a lot of time doing damage, and then if someone really needs heals, you can heal them up to full in an instant. You just have to have good overall awareness about not necessarily the health total of the squishies on your team, but the positioning. How in danger are they? As Baptiste, I'm not sitting around trying to always heal out my DPS full, because I'm doing damage. I'm trying to do other stuff, but I am taking notice when my DPS is in a dangerous place. I am taking notice when my DPS is near the enemy DPS or near the enemy tank when they could be under fire, because these are people that I can bail out with Immortality Field. I can burst heal to safety. So the way that you actually heal bot a lot less and get a lot more value by doing damage is by understanding when there are going to be moments where you're going to need to heal or going to need to do something to help your team, and you don't have to be reactive to anything, right? You're already ready, right? You're pre-understanding how the fight's going to play out. You're looking at where your teammates are positioned. You're like, well, that cast is too aggressive. He's definitely going to get jumped. He's definitely going to get jumped. I know he is. Okay, he's getting jumped. I'm ready, right? And this is something that's not just true for Baptiste. It's true for like every character, where if you kind of understand when your team is in good and bad positions, you're already prepared to catch them and prevent them from feeding. The next character that I got talked about is definitely Diva. Just a fantastic character overall, but I still suggest this character to climb to Diamond just because you can get away with a lot of bad play on Diva and still get a ton of value. But here's the tips that I'll give you to get the most value on Diva and just to quickly climb to Diamond. Number one, abuse high ground. Diva is a character that wants to sit like a freaking perch. You're like a gargoyle on the high ground looking down on everyone, right? And if there's a tank, I don't care who it is, doesn't matter really what tank it is, you don't fly at the tank. You don't meet the tank even. If the tank goes to point, you don't fight the tank on point. I don't care if they're capping the objective. I just don't care. I don't care at all. A Diva's job is to find the weakness, kill the weakness, and then deal with the enemy team once you already have an advantage, right? So this doesn't mean meeting Ryan's face to face. It doesn't mean you meeting Arissa's face to face, Zarya's face to face, Doom's face to face. You don't do any of that unless these characters are 1 HP or you have a fundamental advantage, like a huge amount of team advantage, right? You have 5 people alive and they have 3 people or 2 people alive, right? So instead, you look for people that are out of position. You look for Annas in the back line. You look for a Widowmaker by herself, a Hanzo by himself. And these are the characters that you go for. You swoop down, you kill them, you secure a kill, then you all of a sudden create a ton of pressure in the back line, and then you can pivot back up to the high ground, back up to your perch, and then you're looking again and you're swooping down, or you're gonna go take the fight now that you picked up that advantage. And it's super important on Diva that you're not just trading your body to preserve space. This happens way too often where a Diva's like, oh man, I need to stop the cart, or oh man, I need to stop the objective. I'm just gonna fly right to cart and die, and I'm gonna stall it a little bit, and the Ryan's just gonna beat me down. Like, that is almost as bad in ideology as like if a Widowmaker tried to contest against a Ryan, which no one would ever do, but for some reason people disregard a Diva's mech. Like, oh, I'm a tank, I'm supposed to do this. Oh, I'm a Diva, I'm supposed to do this. Absolutely not. Your mech is like 95% of your character. This is not a situation where you should just be throwing your mech away. And the best way to fully describe Diva is that oftentimes you will lose the battle to win the war. As in, you will give up an advantage to take a better one, right? Think about it like chess or any strategic game. You're giving up a pawn, or you're giving up some amount of value to the enemy team, dangling it like a carrot on a stick in order to swipe them, swipe their house, kill their queen, whatever the case may be. So in the analogy, you're like, oh, I'm going to give you a tick, but I'm going to kill your Widow. Or I'm going to give you a tick and I'm going to kill your Ana and your Hanzo. Or I'm going to give you half half a tick and I'm gonna do this, or I'm gonna give you this amount of space, but I'm actually waiting for you to not be able to peel this person. And that's the idea behind Diva. She's a very game sense oriented person, but you don't even have to think about things that advanced yet. All you have to do is really not feed on Diva. That's really all you have to do. All you have to do is not die to enemy tanks over and over and over again. They are not your primary objective unless you absolutely have to, and I mean really have to, like the point is about to be captured if no one touches it and you're the only one that can. That situation. Or the opponent tank is like super low in health, super low on resources, super low on people alive on their team, and things like that. So you're able to clean things up because they don't have the advantages that they normally do. Now, the next character that I gotta talk about you to climb to Diamond and beyond is definitely Hanzo. And Hanzo can be a difficult character to mechanically master. I've talked about this before, but you don't need to even get close to a skill ceiling to get a ton of value on Hanzo. The thing about Hanzo is he can just one-shot people, and he's the only character that can do it consistently these days. And this is so strong because whether you're shooting at people intentionally or spamming chokes, Hanzo can get just instant value and just win a team fight out of nowhere. But the things that you need to learn how to do on Hanzo is, number one, take off angles that use your range to make it really hard to push you, right? You don't want to push too close. A lot of Hanzos want to get really, really up close and personal because it makes their shots a lot easier to hit, right? And so they get too close, they start spamming from close or shooting from close, and then they get pushed and killed, right? But Hanzo can play at a very far range away. There's no fallout for you, so you can really spam, do damage, get picks from an off angle. And I want to make this clear. This is an important concept. Aggressive off angles does not mean close off angles. A lot of people think, oh, an aggressive off angle, I'm playing away from my team and I'm playing super close to the enemy team. No, that's not what an aggressive off angle means. Aggressive off angles is an off angle that is threatening to the position of the enemy team. If you are in an off angle where the enemy cannot dodge you or deny LOS to you and your team, this is aggressive. And the more that you can see of them, the more aggressive you are. It doesn't necessarily have to be close. It has to be problematic for them and forces them to move. Otherwise, they're just going to stand there and take pot shots at you. So if you are really, really close to your team or just a little bit away, that's kind of like a semi-off angle. An aggressive one, maybe you're way away from your team, making it far harder for the enemy to actually just cut both you and your team's line of sight without giving up a ton of space, right? So they're going to either back up, or they're going to push you, or they're going to push your team. And that's why you make sure that you're still utilizing your distance when you take these angles, because your distance is keeping you alive, but you're still a threat. It doesn't matter if you're far away, because it's not the distance that makes you scary, it's the line of sight that makes you scary. And the distance is just where you're effective, and Hanzo's effective from any range, so you can play the max distance and still be threatening and still have an effective off angle where other characters might not be able to have an off angle that far. They can still have an off angle that aggressive, but not that far. Now, I will say that there are going to be moments where you can close in the gap and try to go for a more aggressive play, but you typically want to do that when enemies are distracted and you have some amount of terrain that you can utilize to get away from a play. So, like, if you're climbing up to a high ground to a perch where an on is at, you get a couple of shots, and then you retreat, and then you use your Sonic to punish anyone that's chasing you, seeing them through the wall, and then potentially one-shotting them as they chase you if they try to commit to it. And the thing here is you want the enemy team to completely mobilize to stop you, meaning that your team is going to get an advantage on the front line, or you're trying to make it hard for them to chase you and punish you. So that's moments where you can be aggressive, but that's not going to be the predominant play on Hanzo. These are moments in between, and you're typically doing these based on opportunity and terrain, not just perma going for flanks all the time. Like, you're not just going to like walk out of spawn, walk straight to a flank and try to do that, because especially a Hanzo that does this more and more, like the more times that you do this, the less effective it's going to be. If you're trying to do something that unpredictable, it's better if they already know your general play style, your consistent one, and then this kind of comes out of left field. Now, the next character that we got to talk about is Ana, and everyone has already grinded Ana. Everyone plays Ana. She's the most popular character, period, but she's also one of the best to climb to Diamond, and it's actually fairly simple just because of how powerful Ana's abilities are. There's a couple of tips I'll give you. Number one is just you need to be aggressive with your ultimate use. Like, if you get an ultimate on Ana and you get it fastest in the lobby, use that tempo. Swing the whole game in your favor. If you get it first, be the one to use it first. And a lot of Anas are like, oh, well, maybe we'll win without it. But if you leave yourself in this abyss state and the enemy decide to fire off their ultimates first, Not only are ultimates typically worse when used reactively, a lot of them are worse, except for the defensive ultimates, of course, but the timing is harder, and to use them reactively and actually get value is harder than using them aggressively, where they can kick off the fight's momentum, they naturally play into people's aggressive temperament and aggressive nature after the fight has been sitting at a standstill for a while, and you can also use Nano to build another person's ultimate and just kind of snowball. In metas like this right now, characters like Orisa and Zarya are fantastic Nano targets, because they keep the fight moving, and it's also super important that when you do something like this, something that's built off tempo, right? You're not comboing, you're trying to out-tempo the enemy team by getting an ultimate first, nano somebody, push forward. You want to stack onto momentum. So what I mean by that is if you can do other things that create pressure after you have done something that creates pressure, then that's how enemies buckle under the pressure. And you might be asking, okay, how do I create multiple forms of pressure? Well, there's several ways to do it, but the best way on it is nanoing somebody, and then trying to throw and hit an aggressive nade, and then trying to throw and hit an aggressive sleep, and then trying to do damage, and then... No, I'm just kidding. That's it. Just the idea is that you're stacking one problem on another problem on another problem on another problem, where it's just like, instead of the enemy team having one problem, and then they're like, okay, we'll solve it, it's like they have 5 problems that come out of nowhere. It's like, oh, you know, maybe you have some problems and, you know, you need a couple $100s to pay rent, right? But then your car breaks down and then you get stabbed. I'm just kidding. That's a way different problem, but you get the idea, right? Stacking problems make the first problem really hard to deal with when there's all these other problems. And that's what you can do on not only Ana, but every character. Keep in mind that a lot of the tips I'm giving on these characters kind of work for all the other characters, but it is an important concept to understand, because stacking these things allow you to really make it so enemies just get overwhelmed and create mistakes and create problems that they can't solve all at once, and that's how you win games. Now, last but certainly not least, we have Zarya. And Zarya is just super freaking strong right now and has always been super overpowered in the diamond ranks and below. And this is for a couple of reasons. When Zarya has a high amount of energy, which most people feed you a ton amount of energy, especially when they're not really disciplined, you just have to apply pressure, which when I say apply pressure, I don't mean just walk forward and just kind of like hope that they shoot you. I mean actually deal damage, get in a range, take space, contest point. These type of things will generate pressure that will be responded to with damage, right? And then you can generate a whole bunch of charge with your bubble. But when you have high energy and multiple bubbles, you basically get to do whatever you want. You can sometimes just keep applying pressure, watching the battlefield, waiting for someone to step out of position, and then boom, I'm gonna walk past the front line and literally just use a bubble to kill somebody. Or sometimes you can even just use your high charge to just completely vaporize the enemy tank. Orisa right now is kind of just gonna get completely destroyed to a Zarya that just keeps applying tons of damage and pressure. And Zarya, full charge Zarya, is one of the few tanks right now that I think can like out damage a lot of this crazy amounts of sustain that's going on with 2 supports. In addition to that, Zarya wins like a 1v1 with everybody when you have charge. Doesn't even matter if they have cooldowns. A Zarya could be really like 1 HP and an Ana could be chasing her. She could turn the corner, bubble, just freaking vaporize the Ana with, you know, her beam and then the alternate fire into the melee and just kill her. No matter the sleep, no matter the nade, doesn't matter. Zarya can do that against like literally every character, where you can turn the tables really easily based on your cooldowns. You can become this unstoppable monster that if enemies aren't coordinated enough in dealing with you, like if they give you time, if they stagger out how they're dealing with you, you can just turn fight after fight after fight with your bubbles. And oftentimes as Zarya, you need to not only be thinking about how do you get out with charge or how do you run away, but also if opponents make the wrong mistake, you could turn a fight out of nowhere. You could be in a situation where you're technically super, super weak, but it doesn't matter, because if someone chases you and you get a bubble back, you can kill them and just turn that tables out of nowhere and just kill them even from 1 HP. And then outside of that, also just being able to bubble your team and protect them. It's a bit harder to do this, and I think it's something that is a little difficult to get value out of, because sometimes teammates are just dead, right? They just either are alive or dead instantly, and it's really hard to save them with bubbles. But I would say very similar to the tips I gave you with Baptiste, where you notice when your team are out of position, you notice the relative position of enemies, and then you kind of surmise what's going to happen, right? And the better that you can predict what's going to happen in the fight, the better better you're going to be able to bubble, because you're not just doing it reactively. Like, you see these top 500 Zaryas that they just turn on a whim and bubble someone perfectly. That's so freaking hard. Like, for everybody, even Grandmaster players have a hard time doing that consistently. But if you imagine what the enemy's doing, if you notice their habits, if you notice the people that are out of position on your team, this is going to allow you to set up these plays easier in the same way that it worked with Baptiste. So anyways, these are the 6 heroes that I would highly suggest climbing to Diamond with, and tips I gave you on each one I think apply to all the characters that you could possibly play. So if you want to grind a different character, you could still utilize these tips to help you climb. But I really hope you enjoyed the video. Definitely let me know if you have any questions. Thank you so much for coming by, and I'll see you next time.